Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has delivered an impassioned speech to the US Congress, defending the war in Gaza and denouncing protesters outside. In the coming hours, Joe Biden will deliver an address from the Oval Office about his decision to bow out of the White House race and what lies ahead. We'll bring you that live at 1 a.m. A police officer has been removed from operational duties after video shared on social media appeared to show a man being kicked and stomped on while on the floor at Manchester Airport. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Telegraph's deputy comment editor, Annabel Denham. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on the front pages for you now. Well, the Telegraph leads with Tory leader hopeful Tom Tugendhat saying he's ready to lead the European Convention on Human Rights. And in the last few moments, we've heard that he's officially declared to run as the leader of the Conservative Party. The Eye hears that the former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is trying to assemble a group of independent MPs to push back against the policies of the new Labour government. The Express discusses the senior army officer who was stabbed outside an army barracks, as does the Mirror. The Metro leads with the arrest of a man over the A61 crash that killed 6 people, including 2 children, on Sunday. The Guardian reveals rich countries like the UK and US are leading a stampede against climate commitments when it comes to oil and gas expansion. While the Times leads with Labour's plans for thousands of offshore wind turbines. According to the FT, American tech firms are sliding on the stock market, amongst them Tesla and the parent company of Google. The Daily Mail leads with the potential end of 1p and 2p coins. And the Star claims a shark has been spotted in the Thames. We have had a whale before, haven't we? I'm pretty certain, but we shall see whether there's any other evidence of the shark. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Kevin Maguire and Annabel Denham. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with politics, shall we? And in the last few moments, we've had that breaking news that Tom Tugendhat is putting himself forward in the leadership race for the Conservative Party, but had previously written an article in your paper, Annabel.
That's right. Tom Tugendhat is the second to throw his hat in the ring, with nominations for the leadership contest closing on Monday. As you say, Gillian, perhaps half a dozen, maybe more others expected to follow his lead, or rather James Cleverly's lead. And you know, it's interesting in terms of the content here, the fact that Tugendhat appears to be tacking to the right, potentially to try and neutralise the threat from Kemi Badenoch, if indeed she does decide to try and be a candidate. And you know, his position on the ECHR has changed since 2022, and I think Kevin is perhaps meeting it with a degree of scepticism. But you know, certainly, even before the general election, there was a sense that membership of the ECHR was going to be the new Brexit for the Conservative Party. It was going to be the issue. Immigration, legal and illegal immigration was going to be the issue that really divided the Conservative Party, and that would perhaps, in years to come, come to a head. But you know, at the moment we don't know enough about who is going to try and put themselves forward. But I think a concern is that there hasn't really been a thorough diagnosis of what went wrong for the Tories on July the 4th. James Cleverly pitching himself as the unity candidate, that's all very well, but I think that the party needs to have a very serious conversation about why it is that it's so disunited. And it's not just a question of who will lead the party into the next general election, but also who will be at the helm when the Tories are in opposition, and perhaps the qualities for the two will be different. And certainly Keir Starmer seems to think that he will be the Prime Minister for not 5 years, but 10. So,
Tom Tugendhat specifically saying that if institutions make it harder for Britain to control its border, the UK would have to exempt ourselves from them or leave their jurisdiction. And he claims that is a common-sense Conservative position to take.
Yeah, and the key word there is if. I don't believe Tom Tugendhat believes a word of this. I mean, he was Security Minister. He doesn't believe in pulling out of institutions. He believes in strengthening them and cooperation. But I can see...
But it's quite a thing to claim if he doesn't believe in it at all.
Well, he said
and he'll be held to...
Because he has to win an election in a Conservative Party which last time it had a vote picked Liz Truss, went really well that, and is very much to the right of the MPs in Parliament. So Suella Braverman would say, I'd definitely leave. Tom Tugendhat isn't saying that. He's saying if now Keir Starmer and the Labour UK government could prove him wrong and actually control the borders while being in the European Convention of Human Rights, just like virtually every other European country. But this election is a godsend for the Telegraph because it's the paper read by Tory members. And that's why he's launched in the Telegraph, so you can get at them. I suspect you'll get many of them.
Certainly, Tugendhat would not be the first, where he's successful leader of the opposition in very recent history to make various pledges.
Well, Keir Starmer did.
In the run-up to becoming the leader, but he did not.
Keir Starmer was on the left, going to renationalise gas and electricity as well as well. Yeah, a load of promises that when he gets the job and then he wants to win an election, he moves. But the Conservative membership is very reformy at the moment. A lot of them, like Nigel Farage, would welcome him in the party, and Tom Tugendhat will be aware of that as he makes his pitch. I think that he's a former soldier, former security minister. Some Tory MPs call him Tommy Tugboat. And he knows that
he's just made that public now.
Well, yeah, they call him it.
But he is laying down the gauntlet, isn't he, to the others?
But you know...
This is potentially the totemic issue for the party.
I think he'll have an authenticity problem if he's making this pitch, instead of saying, no, I think we should stay in the European Convention of Human Rights, maybe press to reform it, is how you respond to it. But leaving it, I'm not grasping that he actually believes that, given everything he's said hitherto.
But as you say, there is a big fat if in the statement
that
he's made
it's an important
public.
if.
In terms of dissecting what exactly went wrong, he's suggesting that the trust of the British people was lost after failing to meet promises to lower taxes and immigration.
Well, I mean, that much is clear, but I suppose there aren't obvious solutions to that, nor to the warring within the Conservative Party that, we saw, particularly, I would say, in the aftermath of Liz Truss, her defenestration, and then Rishi Sunak coming in, pledging to stop the boats, pledging to try and fix the economy and failing to do so. Now, some of that may have been due to factors outside of his own hands, but some of it was because his attempts were thwarted by members of his own party. And as I say, I think it's simply insufficient to suggest that all that the Tories need to do is to be unified and present a unified front to the British electorate, because there is obvious division and disagreement there.
I see in here the Telegraph has Victoria Atkins, the former Health Secretary, rather sensibly ruling herself out. She had been touted on. Suspect she even thought about it, but it does feel a bit like a lot of bald people fighting over a comb at the moment, because the Conservatives have been thumped. You've got to think, what does the party stand for? Who does it want to represent? And then how do you heal that split on the right in British politics? Either defeating Nigel Farage and Reform and somehow pushing them back, or do they end up inviting them in? Because as long... Labour won on 34% of the vote, 20% of the vote if you take turnout at 60, you come down 1 in 5 adults, because the Conservative vote collapsed to 24%. Reform got another, 15 today? And if those proportions remain around, sort of 39% of the vote or whatever it was, split between the two, then Keir Starmer will be laughing all the way to the 10 years you mentioned. Just
very quickly before we move on to another story, Tugendhat saying that he doesn't believe the leadership election will be divisive. Do we think it's going to be a clean fight?
Oh, I
yes
mean...
or no?
I imagine it will be. I think that there are...
They never are.
In some ways, I think there are benefits to it being so drawn out. It's clearly a marathon and not a sprint, and that means that animosities and grievances could perhaps be aired early on in the leadership contest, and as we approach it, perhaps that it is, as you say, a cleaner fight.
Using the conference as hustings, I think, is a very good idea, because in a way what the Conservatives say at the moment doesn't matter. But I go back to 2005, it was used as hustings. It was David Cameron and David Davis as the two main contenders. And the briefing by the Cameron lot against Davis was gloriously vicious. And I suspect that will happen again. I'm not making a value judgment on it, because as a journalist, I love it.
What is also interesting about Tugendhat, in terms of your point about the Conservative Party potentially tacking to the right in order to neutralise reform, is he's viewed as one of the centrists.
Yeah, one nation.
One of the centrist, one nation contenders, perhaps alongside James Cleverly. Now, if Tom Tugendhat is tacking to the right, if he's suggesting that he's ready to leave the ECHR, and then you've got others like, Kemi, Suella, Pretty, well, that does seem to indicate the direction that the party might go.
But at the moment you go to the right, you lose votes in the centre.
Let's just quickly get to the other story. I think we're just going to have time for this in the eye. And Jeremy Corbyn seemingly assembling an anti-Labour posse. Kevin?
Yeah, he's approached the 7 suspended Labour MPs. I thought it was a massive overreaction by Keir Starmer and Labour to do that, but nevertheless been suspended for 6 months. He's held meeting after meeting with the 4 Gaza Muslim independents who were elected, Blackburn and elsewhere. And he's approached the 7 to try and get them to work with him. I mean, if they did, then they'd be, well, 5 and 7 is 12. They'd be the 4th biggest party or 4th biggest grouping in Parliament. I can't actually see the 7 doing it. They've got 6 months suspension. They'll try and work their ticket back. But of course, he's out to make mischief. Nothing wrong, but wouldn't it be ironic, though, if what I consider an overreaction by Starmer, although I understand the King's speech after an election, why it's particularly unwise, considered unwise to vote for an SNP motion against that. Wouldn't it be ironic if he produced a reform of the left by forcing the 7 into suspension?
Possibly.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Whether Sir Keir Starmer will regret
it's a lot of weird.
Jeremy Corbyn outside of the tent, whether he'll regret that in future. We are going to take a break. Thank you very much for the moment. Coming up, Israel's Prime Minister addresses the US Congress amid protests and boycotts. We'll be discussing that next. Do stay with us.
My name is Oksana and I'm Ukrainian Olympian for Ukraine 2008. I've been invited to speak about this big issue, big problem in my country, what's going on right now. And this number, 487, that's a huge number for me to even say. Yeah. But I was there on behalf of all of these athletes whose dream was killed by Russian army. And their names, sadly, in the dead list. But the name should be in the list of sports history of Ukraine. But the message for all of this, how I understand, just to stop the war and stop this number to be raised, because there's still 4,000 athletes at the front line fighting. So if we can do anything to make this war stop, that's going to be great. I think they will be happily proud that somebody is speaking about this problem. I'm sure they're dreaming about the day when the war will be over and they can continue competing and represent their country on the biggest world arenas. I have lots of friends because I studied in a boarding school, so there wasn't on. So my sport is wrestling. But there wasn't only wrestling, there was shooting, athletics, boxing, gymnastics, and lots of different sports. So I know lots of athletes who already been killed and sadly passed away since the war started. But still, I have lots of friends who are still there.
Life for young people at the moment is absolutely terrible because they should go to school between missile attack. They should compete between missile attack, and everything this can't. It has huge influence on their psychological health. When kids are growing from 3, 6, 7 years, always in the war, they have really a big problem with health.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, the very badly behaved Kevin Maguire and Annabelle Denham. We do try and keep them in check. Let's have a look at the Times World and Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress. Quite eventful, not least for all the protesters outside, and quite a rousing speech from him, not, well, defending the war in Gaza, although it was boycotted by several Democrats. Kevin?
Yeah, according to the Times, there are more than 30 leading Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi, former Democrat leader of the House. Kamala Harris wasn't there, although I think she was citing a prior engagement. Huge protests outside, some in the gallery. One representative held up a sign calling him a war criminal in the chamber. Maggots and crickets released in the Watergate Hotel, where some of the Israeli delegation was saying, but he was his usual combative, bellicose, defiant self. So he was going to go on for a total victory. It's 9 months on now since that horrific pogrom in which 1,200 Israelis died, but now more than 30,000 Palestinians being killed in Gaza, many of them women and children who clearly aren't combatants, places being razed. And he hasn't won. No. And perhaps you never can militarily like that, and you're just creating more and more Hamas fighters and people who are going to oppose you both in Gaza and in the occupied West Bank. So it's he bangs the drum, but he's failed Israel.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely bellicose, as you say, because his plea was, give us the weapons to finish this, essentially, is what he was saying, and also described the protesters, saying that they should be ashamed of themselves. They're Iran's useful idiots.
Well, this is coming, of course, at a crucial moment for Benjamin Netanyahu. 9 months, as Kevin says, into the conflict. His popularity at home is absolutely plummeting. Many people in Israel oppose the way in which Netanyahu has gone about this war on Hamas. They want the hostages back. Of course they do. He's perhaps still not forgiven for the security failures that took place on in the run-up to October the 7th. So, yes, it was a robust, defiant speech, and of course, I found it interesting, actually, that he commented at all on the protesters outside. Perhaps he felt that he had no choice but to. Of course, the war has been very divisive in the US. We've seen protests and indeed arrests on college campuses. This is also Netanyahu's first trip since the ICC said it was seeking his arrest for possible war crimes in Gaza. So, this is, as I say, a very very, time of very heightened tensions, a very emotive issue for many people in America. But I just wonder who he felt he was winning over with his remarks, accusing the protesters of being Iran's useful idiots. There will be some people in America who will have sympathy with that position, but I'm sure it's one they would have held.
Yeah, he did get a number of standing ovations in Congress, didn't he? But it was noted that there was no mention of a ceasefire or any deal being reached.
There's more than 100 hostages still held. You hope they're alive. I'm afraid some are probably not. But the big release of hostages was in a truce. And there was a prisoner swap. It wasn't Israeli military action. So if you're a family, a friends...
And Annabelle, thank you very much for the moment. We have run out of time. Let's take a look at the weather for you now. Well, there'll be a scattering of showers over the next few days and rain in the south tomorrow. It'll be mild and rather murky at first, with drizzle in places and fog on western hills. But there'll be some sunny breaks in the north and west. Southern Britain will have quite a cloudy morning with drizzly outbreaks becoming largely confined to the southeast and some heavier rain running along the Channel coast. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivers an impassioned speech to the US Congress, defending the war in Gaza and denouncing protesters outside.